Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCullum and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction House taking a look at some of the guns that they are going to be selling in their upcoming May of 2017 premiere auction. And I happened to notice that in this auction they had no less than 3 different versions of Dragunov rifles. And I thought this would be an excellent opportunity for us to take a look at all 3 side by side. So specifically, we have a Tiger, we have an actual Soviet military SVD Dragunov, and we have a Chinese NDM-86 in .308 caliber. And there's a lot of speculation on the internet about what really the differences are between these guns. And the truth is there's basically no difference between these guns in practical terms. That may be heresy to some people, but the differences are really quite minor. Now we'll take a look at the internal differences because there are a few that I do want to point out. But in practice, handling, shooting, these are all going to be practically identical. Now the Dragunov began development in 1958 by Yevgeny Dragunov, predictably. And what the Soviet Union was looking for in this rifle was a new sharpshooter's rifle. They had attempted, well, they'd started by scoping the 9130 Mosin Nagant, and that worked well. And then in 1940, they attempted to introduce a semi-automatic marksman's rifle, optically sighted, which was the SVT-40. Now the SVT-40 was a reasonably effective self-loading rifle, but it was a failure as a marksman's rifle. There were too many accuracy problems with the guns, especially the differences between first round and subsequent rounds. It wouldn't, when the barrel started to heat at all, it wouldn't hold at 0 well. And they tried using it in World War II and it just was not effective. And for that reason, you'll see only a very small number of very early SVT rifles were actually equipped with optical sights. After that, they ditched the optics. They continued to manufacture and issue the rifles in large numbers, but as an infantry rifle. So after World War II, they knew they had gone back to reissuing the 9130 Mosin Nagant with an optic, and they knew that they needed something to fill this void because the Mosin Nagant was not doing it adequately. Now, this isn't so much a sniper rifle in this guise of some guy in a ghillie suit crawling 5 miles and then camping out for 3 days in his own filth and then taking one shot at a high-value target. The idea behind the Dragunov, which is also the idea behind the scoped SVT-40, is that it is kind of like a machine gun or a light mortar. It is an extra, a force multiplier. It's an extra piece of an infantry combined arms unit that you can place to get better support to an infantry unit. So a guy with an SVT was expected to be able to take shots at human targets at up to 600 to 800 meters. And you could largely use one of these in place of, for example, a Maxim machine gun. Instead of dominating through volume of fire, you would have a very effective, accurate fire that would allow you to control an area. So that was the purpose of this rifle. And it does it really well. What's really cool about Dragunov's design is he recognized that everything, in designing a rifle like this, everything is about trade-offs. You have accuracy, you have weight, you have reliability, and these all require different focuses. And so if you want to increase reliability and durability, for example, you would typically do this by strengthening a lot of parts, making things heavier. If you want to increase accuracy, one of the ways to do it is to increase the barrel weight, especially to make sure that the barrel doesn't change point of impact over many, many rounds fired. However, as you do that, you increase the weight, and you thus make the gun less portable. When the Soviets set out the specifications for this rifle, one of the things they were very strict about was that it had to be a lightweight gun. This had to be easily transported. They didn't want, a 15 or 20 pound sniper rifle. They really wanted something that was close in weight to the standard AK assault rifle. And that's what they got. Dragunov, who had experience as a designer of Olympic-style target rifles, was able to put together this gun that had acceptable accuracy, acceptable weight, acceptable reliability, and did everything pretty well. This really kind of is a jack-of-all-trades rifle. It's not the most accurate. It's up there for reliability. It's an extremely reliable, durable, rugged gun because that was a primary concern for the Soviet military. And it's quite light. This thing comes in at 4.5 kilos or right at 10 pounds, which is great for a precision rifle in the field. It's easy to carry around. It's not really a burden. Accuracy-wise, these are typically going to be 1.5 to 2 minute of angle guns. I know there are people out there who are going to talk a lot about sub-minute of angle groups. I think those things are really coincidental and occasional occurrences and not standard expected performance for the guns. They didn't need to be that accurate, and one of the trade-offs made in order to get the guns to be lightweight and reliable was to not try to force super sub-minute of angle accuracy. Now, the three versions we have here, of course, this is, as best I can tell, a legitimate military-issued Soviet Dragunov rifle. This, the Tiger, is the commercial version of the gun that was marketed by Izhmash, Izhmash, which is the Izhmash manufacturing plant's commercial arm. Those are sold as hunting rifles, high-end, nice hunting rifles in the Soviet Union. And a couple thousand of them total have been imported into the US, or a couple thousand Dragunovs in general. Exact numbers on the Tiger, I don't know offhand, but they have been brought in by a number of different companies. And then the Chinese copied the SVD. Now, we'll get into some of the details of this in a minute. They made them in both 308 and 7.62 by 54 rimmed caliber. The Soviet guns are all in 54 rimmed, all the military ones. The Tigers, the commercial ones, are available in 7.62 NATO, 7.62 by 54, and also 9.3 millimeter. There are a few differences between the NDM-86 and the Soviet rifles, and there's also a few differences between the Soviet military and commercial rifles. So why don't we take these apart and take a look at what those differences are. Probably the most common and basic misconception about the Dragunov is that it is not, in fact, an AK. While it does bear some external similarity to the AK, it is a substantially different design in pretty much every way. No parts interchange between the two. So controls are reasonably similar. We do still have the same pattern of safety and dust cover. These are semi-automatic only, of course, always have been. There are no full auto versions of the Dragunov. Trigger, this is actually your disassembly lever, so we'll get to that in just a moment. The magazine catch is also reasonably similar to that of the AK. Now, if we look at the magazines, you'll see that this kind of has a grid waffle pattern on it of reinforcing ribs. That is an SVD magazine. The PSL, the Romanian marksman's rifle, which is an upsized AK, has a very similar pattern magazine, but it has an X shape to the reinforcing ribs, and that's the easy way to differentiate the two because they are not interchangeable. 10-round magazine. This is, of course, a Tiger in 7.62 by 54 rimmed. This is one that came in through California Arms, which is a little bit unusual in that it came with the flash hider and bayonet lug assembly. Typically, the Tiger does not have these things because it is just a commercial sporting rifle. But this particular import batch did come with them, and most people put them on. It does have the typical polymer front end furniture, though, for a Tiger. So we'll take a quick look at the gas system here by taking this off. In order to do that, we're going to start by pulling this lever down. You would normally do that with a cartridge, but I'm going to use my universal disassembly tool here. Just push it down. There we go. And forward. It has this little hook on it here that locks it inside this retaining cap. So we rotate that all the way down, and then we can pop this front handguard retainer forward. With that up and out of the way, we can now pop the handguards off, and they are kind of retained by this little sheet metal plate there. So we're going to, there we go, pop that off, and then pop off the bottom one. Now we can get a better look at the gas system, which is a short stroke piston. When the rifle fires, this piston is going to come backwards. You can see it moving right up inside here, right there. It's going to come back, hit the bolt, and throw the bolt rearwards. Can be disassembled. Just push it in, it comes out. Then we have our gas block, or gas plug there. This is the actual piston component that comes backwards, and its range of motion is fairly limited. See, there's a little vent hole so that once the piston clears that, gas vents out that hole instead of putting further pressure on the system. All right, I'm switching now to the military Dragunov, the Soviet military one. This actually has a 2-position adjustable gas system. So I can push this catch in and rotate it between number 1 right there and number 2 right there. There's this, this block on the side is set so that you can put a 54 rimmed case in there and use it as a lever to turn this if it gets sticky. The adjustable gas system is a bit of extra complexity that wasn't deemed necessary for the civilian version. So the Tigers, as well as the NDM-86 rifles, do not have that adjustability. However, these parts will drop into an NDM-86 if you want to use them and find a spare set. Now let's move on to the receiver area. We have a scope on here. This is the standard scope that was used on the Dragunov, which is a 4x24 PSO1. There are other scopes available. The side rail system, of course, now has been used for a wide variety of optics. There's a locking lever here that I'm going to lift up and rotate open. There we go, it's up. Once it's unlocked, the scope slides very easily off the back of the rail. All right, now that the scope is off, we can remove the dust cover. We're going to do that by taking this lever and rotating it just about 180 degrees backwards. Push it down there, and it can snap into position on that little screw. And then the dust cover just lifts straight up. So unlike the AK, the dust cover has the recoil spring and guide integral to it. This is actually much more similar to the SVT. We'll set that aside. Then the bolt carrier slides to the back and lifts out, and the bolt itself is there inside. Unlike the AK, we can now take the fire control group out as a complete unit, which is pretty handy. To do that, we rotate the safety lever up, and when it's approximately vertical, there we go, it will pop out. There we go. So the safety lever comes out, and then the trigger unit just pops out the bottom. So it's got these 2 hooks that lock on this bar, and then the safety lever locks it in place. A couple quick features to note about the Dragunov design. For one thing, it has 3 locking lugs instead of 2 on the AK. That's done because more locking surfaces gives you a more repeatable lockup and improves accuracy of the design. It's also stronger, which doesn't hurt, but I don't think that's the primary reason. The recoil spring guide in here is actually designed so that it pivots down like this. That makes it much easier to install this back into the rifle. That's cool. That fixes a potential issue that was in the SVT-40. And of course, having the trigger as a removable unit is a really handy, nice thing. And these have a much better trigger pull to them than a typical AK. One of the main differences between all of these different Dragunov versions is the trigger mechanism and how it interacts with the bolt. And this is a very subtle difference. You'd never actually know it shooting the guns, but it's interesting to take a look at here because we have examples of all 3. So this is the original military SVD. We have a hammer right here, and what's that? It's not going anywhere when I pull the trigger. The reason is that there is a disconnect here. Now this is designed to be a safety. So what happens is when the bolt goes forward, there's a little tab on the back of the bolt right here that is going to ride up onto that lever and push this lever down. Now the hammer is actually being held by the sear, and when I pull the trigger, it will fire. When I recock it, it gets held by this disconnect again, and the trigger does nothing. So these were always semi-auto guns. These were never full auto guns. There is no full auto capability to the SVD. However, the way this is designed is basically the same as an auto trip or an auto sear in a machine gun. In other machine gun designs, this functions to, when you hold the trigger down, this prevents the hammer from actually releasing until the bolt is fully closed. So when the Dragunov, when various versions of the Dragunov were submitted for import into the US, ATF looked at this lever and said, oh, that's an auto sear, you can't have that in the gun. So they were removed. This is the imported Tiger fire control group, and you'll notice no lever. So on the left here is the military, and on the right is the civilian import. And really all they did was get rid of this component. You can see it's crosspin here. There's still a hole for it in the trigger group, but the component itself is gone. Now, even without that, there is still a disconnector. So this, the trigger has to go forward. If you just hold the trigger down, it does not fire. So there's one shot. The trigger bar, as long as you hold it down, is out of position to re-engage and pull the sear again until you release it to there, at which point it can fire a second time. So this is, in every way, still a semi-auto gun. It just doesn't have that out-of-battery safety that the original military one did, which is right there. The way this thing works, by the way, is we have a component right in there that is going to catch on the hammer. You can see it moving up and down right there. It catches on the hammer engagement surface until it's pushed down, at which point it releases the hammer to be held by the sear right here, which is this rotational part right there. Now the Chinese did things slightly differently. They never bothered with this bar up in the front. They instead have a disconnector, an additional disconnector, here in the back. So when this bar goes down, it's going to push the trigger bar, which is right down there at the bottom. It pushes it down and out of engagement, which guarantees that it disconnects and doesn't fire fully automatic. Now this is redundant because even without this lever, this trigger group still functions the same way. So as long as I hold that down, it doesn't fire a second time until I release the trigger, which allows the trigger bar back up in contact. However, this acts as a duplicate, a redundant backup doing the same thing, and I suspect that was added for ATF compliance. So for comparison's sake, up on top here we have the Chinese, and on the bottom we have the Tiger. You can also see evidence of that in the bolts. So these are the two Russian bolts, and you'll notice they have these little tabs on the back. This is the Chinese bolt where this surface is milled flat. And that's because this surface has to come back and engage on that lever, which doesn't exist in the Russian guns. So that's why. One interesting element to note is that the manufacturing style of the bolt carriers in the two Russian guns changed. So this is the military SVD and this is the Tiger. You can see this has a big cutout on the side. This was done to reduce weight. So on the original SVD bolt, the bolt is actually hollow inside here. They drilled these two holes out. You can see that big open empty space. And that's so that you can have a relatively large component that doesn't have as much weight as if it were completely solid. On the Tiger, apparently they just changed manufacturing methods and it was easier to mill off a piece out of the side rather than drill holes. So you can see that difference there. These bolts appear to be totally interchangeable. They should be, as far as I can tell they are, just a change in the manufacturing style. The back of the bolt was changed at the same time. The original military gun here has this short little tail that acts as a hammer stop, so if the hammer does fall before the bolt's fully home, which it shouldn't be able to because of the disconnector, that little tail will catch the hammer and prevent it from hitting the firing pin and firing out a battery. On the Tiger, they've kind of changed that by just leaving the entire back end of the bolt solid there. So this whole section up here does the job of that little tail. Again, functionally exactly the same. You'd never be able to tell the difference from shooting the guns. They work the same, just two different styles of making them. Now we have the military one on top and the Chinese NDM on the bottom. You'll see the NDM has the tail, but it's just slightly differently milled. So the back of the bolt isn't quite as long as it is, or back of the bolt carrier, isn't quite as long here as it is on the Russian gun. A few other just very minor differences that show that the NDM-86 is not, in fact, a Chinese manufactured gun or not made in the same place as the Izhmash ones. If you look at things like the profile of this cut, you'll see that the Russian gun here is rounded at the end of this channel, where the Chinese one is squared. Just little elements like this that show that they weren't done on the exact same tooling. little bit of a difference on the receivers, and this is just a manufacturing and stylistic thing. On the military SVD here, there is a lightning cut on the outside above the magazine well. On the Tiger, they got rid of that cut. I think that was just, honestly, just a simplification thing. This is known as a Type 1 pattern, and this is a Type 2 pattern. When the Chinese copied the guns, they copied the Type 1. So the Chinese NDMs have that cut out. Doesn't do anything functionally, it's just a minor lightning cut to the receiver. Aside from markings, really the only practical and visible difference between the Tiger and the SVD is the furniture and the barrel length. So the barrel on the Tiger in the middle is about 2 inches shorter than the Russian and Chinese guns on the top and bottom. That polymer furniture is totally interchangeable with wooden furniture. Polymer is, honestly, it's more durable and it's a lot cheaper, so that's why it was used on the commercial guns. So there was some speculation that the Chinese guns, or some of them, might be just over-stamped Russian production guns. That is certainly not the case based on these two. There are some definite production and design differences between the Chinese NDM and the Russian Dragunov. That said, the practical difference is moot. They shoot the same, they handle the same. You wouldn't know any of those differences without actually taking the guns apart and digging into them. No amount of shooting would show you that there is any practical difference. So really cool to get to take a look at all three of these together. The military one here in particular is an extremely rare gun to encounter in the United States. So, all three of them are coming up for sale individually here at Rock Island. So if you're interested in adding any one of them to your own collection, take a look at the description text below. You'll find links there to the catalog pages for all three. You can look at their pictures, descriptions, etc. And if you'd like to get some shooting time in on your own with one of these, place a bid online or here live at the auction. Thanks for watching.